at the Hawaii Kalak Bible Institute. This is Brother Daniel, and I am thankful to be back with you again. My lesson that I was teaching you was interrupted by the internet here going down, and so I am going to, in this fourth lesson, try to cover what we missed at the end of the last lesson, as well as take us all the way through the end of the book of Genesis. So to do that, we definitely need God's help. So let's pray. God, thank you that you are kind to people who are sinful like us, and that you still look and search for people who will follow you and who will obey you, that you give them mercy, that you call them out, that you separate them to become your followers and to become your friends. Help us to understand and to obey you and to love you as we see this in this story today. Amen. Okay, so after the flood, I was telling you about what things changed. One thing that changed was humans were now allowed to eat animals, but they were commanded to never eat the blood, because blood is sacred to God. And God also established human governments after the flood. He said if someone kills another person, that the murderer should be executed, which was the beginnings of what today are human governments. God gives some of his authority to human government so that they will punish evil and reward goodness. And the purpose of this is so that the world will not become as evil as it was before the flood. And then after the flood, God made a covenant. This is the first time that covenant is mentioned in the Bible. And the covenant is a special holy promise that cannot be broken. God made the first covenant, and he has never broken it. God knew that humans would continue to do things that were wrong and sinful, but God promised to never cover the earth with water again. And God made this promise after Noah killed some animals and burned them as a sacrifice to God. The death of the animals brought God's mercy to the world. The animals took the punishment that the people deserved. So now Jesus, the perfect sacrifice, has died. So God has promised that he will never punish the people who belong to Jesus. Covenants usually have a sign or a symbol when they're made to remind the people of the promise that they made. Like when a man and a woman get married, at least in the United States and other Western countries, the symbol for a wedding usually is a wedding ring, that they wear on their finger. And when they see their wedding ring, they remember their promise to be faithful to their spouse. And the sign of God's covenant to us is the rainbow. When God sees a rainbow, or we see a rainbow, we remember God's promise to never cover the earth with water. He's been keeping that promise for like 4,400 years or something like that now. So a long time, God has been faithful to his covenant. Now, what would you think that people would do who have just been saved from a flood that killed the rest of the world? They've seen the rest of the population, millions of people killed, 8 people narrowly escaped. You would think that they and their children, their children's children would say, oh, God's been so kind to us to let us live. I want to worship and obey the true God. But what did humans do? They started disobeying him again. We learn very slowly, don't we? God told humans to spread out all over the earth. Instead, people decided to all stay in one place. They knew they could be really successful if they all worked together. They said, let's build a city and a tower that reaches into the heavens and a name for ourselves. From this, we learn that sometimes it's not good to unite, to work together with other people, because these humans united in their independence from God. They worked together to rebel against God. Sometimes today, humans organize, get together to try to do things in disobedience to God or to do things without God's help. There's all kinds of societies and organizations and clubs and things that, and governments even, that just try to do things on their own without following God or asking for God's help. And it's interesting, ever since this first time when people wanted to build a tower, humans have wanted to build big, impressive things. it's kind of been a contest among peoples to see who had the biggest building. When I was a child, the biggest building in the world was in the United States. It was called the Sears Tower, and then now it's called the Willis Tower. And but then in 1998, Malaysia built a taller building, and then in 2004, Taiwan built a taller building than that. And then in 2010, the United Arab Emirates finished their tower that was even higher than that, which is 828 meters high. That is really big. Each of these countries, like the original tower builders in Genesis 11, wanted to bring honor to themselves. They wanted to make a name for themselves. And it's not wrong to want to make things. What is important is whose honor are we doing it for? God gave us the ability to make things because God himself has the ability to make things. We can do it to honor ourselves, try to make a name for ourselves, or to try to bring honor to God's name. And throughout history, people have tried to build big, powerful societies, empires. You know, the Egyptian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans and the Byzantines and the Ottomans, the Mughals and the British and the French have all had their time of empire building. And what is it that's kind of happened to all these empires?
They go down the tube.
That's right.
Just like America's going down the tube.
It seems like we're heading down ourselves, yes. Now, you and I, you there in Thailand and me here in Arizona, we probably are never going to build a big tower. We probably won't lead powerful nations that control the world. But what ways are we, just average, ordinary people, tempted to be like the people at the time of Babel? We get busy with our lives, our careers, our dreams, our families. We have our own very small little empires, our little things that we're trying to protect and work on and build. What should we focus our energies on instead? Jesus said, "Seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness, and all the other things will be added to you." What was God's response to this tower in the city that people were building? God came down to look at it. They wanted to build a tower so high that it reached into the heavens, but to God it was so small that he had to come down to look at it. Is there a tower down there? Oh. The greatest human achievements, like building the Great Wall of China or the pyramids or putting man on the moon, because God is so big and awesome, made the whole universe. To him, those are very tiny little things. He has to come down to look at it. And once again, we see a little hint of the Trinity in this story, because God says, "Let us go down and confuse their language." The men had said, "Let us build," and God said, "Let us confuse." The unity of men decided to fight against the unity of God, and God won. But God showed mercy even in punishing these rebels. He could have just killed them all, but instead he chose to punish them by simply destroying their unity. God created different languages, which created, of course, confusion. And the tower became known as Babel, which means confusion. People of each language gathered together into groups, and they went off to different parts of the earth. They spread out like God had told them to do in the first place. And now they were separated, though, by languages. And if you've ever complained about how hard it is to learn English or some other language, you can blame the people at Babel. That's where it all started. So, let's see here. Now we will go on to talk about Genesis chapter 12 through Genesis 50, which can be divided into 4 sections. Chapters 12 through 23 talk about Abraham mainly. 24 through 26 talk about Abraham's son Isaac. 27 through 36 talk about Isaac's son Jacob. And 37 through the end of the book, through chapter 50, talk about Joseph mainly. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob's 12 sons are sometimes called the Patriarchs. A patriarch is like a chief of a family or a tribe, and these men are sometimes called the Patriarchs. So at Babel, humans tried to live independently of God, so God separated them into different languages. Now God starts over again to make a way to rescue humans from their sin. Now, what's an ambassador?
He's somebody that spreads goodwill between people.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
One nation to another.
Mm-hmm.
Government person is appointed as an ambassador to a certain nation. They represent one nation to another nation.
Mm-hmm. Good. So like the United States sends ambassadors to countries all over the world, and the United States ambassador to Thailand right now is a woman named Christy Kenny, and she was appointed as ambassador to Thailand by President Obama. And her job is to represent the people of the United States to the people of Thailand. And her behavior shows the Thai people what Americans behave like. And when she speaks to the Thai people, she speaks for the whole United States. So God decides after the Tower of Babel, different languages, different peoples, different families spreading out over the world, God decides to pick one man and make this man's descendants into a special nation, and use this nation as like his ambassador nation to the other nations of the world, so that when God's nation speaks to the other nations will hear God's word. The way God's nation lives will show the other nations God's character. This chosen nation will worship God, and they'll love God, and God will bless them. And so when other nations see this nation that God has chosen and blessed, then the other nations, they'll want to worship and love God too. So that was God's plan, what God starts to do. Who are God's ambassadors today?
Christians.
That's right, Christians are today. And when Christians act bad, who looks bad?
Christians.
Yes, and God looks bad. When God's followers act bad, and God winds up looking bad to the other non-Christian people.
That's why I'm not a Christian.
He's joking.
No, not me. I mean, that's what people say.
Okay. So the man picked to be the father of this ambassador nation was named
Abraham.
That's right,
Or Abram.
Abram, yeah. And he lived near Babel, and he worshipped idols like everybody else. Abram was not seeking God. God chose Abram. Abram didn't deserve to be the father of God's special nation. God just picked Abram because God wanted to. And so God spoke to Abram in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. And these verses are so important to understanding the rest of the Bible that you should probably memorize these. Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3. God gave Abram a command and some promises. And God commanded Abram to leave his father's house and his homeland. And we saw that God separated things when he made the world. Now here, when God makes his people, he separates them also. So God wanted to separate Abram from everything that had given him security and identity. What are some ways people today find security?
Good job, I guess.
I'm worried.
Good job. Possessions. Other types of possessions. Money. What else? How do we get security?
Well, we get security through our families.
Yes,
Mhm.
relationships.
Wait till you get more.
And then how do people find identity sometimes today? Where do they get their
I'm
identity
not
from?
hurried. Just do when you're able. You gotta live too.
Oh, what do you do? You know, like I'm a professor, I'm a doctor,
Good job.
I'm a CEO of a corporation or something. Good job.
Usually from your job or from your family, like I'm so-and-so's son or so-and-so's father or mother. Usually we get our identity from one of those two places. But God wanted Abram to find his security and his identity only in God. God wanted Abram to trust in God to keep him safe, and he wanted Abram to identify himself as God's ambassador. That would be Abram's identity. So that's one reason why God told Abram to leave his family and his homeland, separate him from his past security and identity, give him a fresh start. He also wanted to separate Abram and Abram's future nation from the bad influence of the other nations that they were at that time living among. They needed to be a distinct, different nation. And if they married into other nations, then they would not be unique. They'd just be like everybody else. Nobody would notice them, notice God's character in them, because they would be just like everybody else. So how does this apply today to the kinds of friends that we should have?
Well, I don't know. Maybe we should try to pick our friends that have the same values that we do.
Okay.
And there aren't, contrary to what God says is right and wrong. I mean, your close friends, if they're always going off and doing stuff that you know is wrong, it's going to create some stress.
To find out, do they worship the true God like we do, right?
Yeah.
We should be friendly to everybody, but our close, like our heart friends, should only be other Christians, because otherwise, whoever we hang out with, whoever we're really close with, we become like, and we would wind up becoming like our non-Christian friends, and then not representing God well to them. That's why, for example, a Christian should not ever marry a non-Christian, because that's such a close connection that the Christian would wind up becoming like the non-Christian. So God promised to give Abram a land, a nation, and a name. God asked Abram to give up his family and his homeland, and then he promises to give Abram a homeland and a family. The people at the Tower of Babel wanted to make a name for themselves, and God promises to make a great name for Abram. He promises that anybody who mistreats Abram will be cursed, anybody who is kind to Abram will be blessed. And the amazing thing is, Abram's 75 years old, and he doesn't have any children yet. And God's telling him all this great stuff's going to happen to your kids. So Abraham believes God. He leaves his homeland, family, and starts traveling without knowing where he's going. And when he gets to Canaan, God says, "This is the place. This is the land I'm going to give to your descendants." So this command that God gave Abram in Genesis 12 to leave his family and his homeland was just the first in a series of tests of Abraham's faith. Sometimes Abram's faith was weak, and he tried to fix his problems his own way instead of trusting God, like when he married Hagar and had his son Ishmael. But when we look at Abram's whole life, we can see that he did have real faith in God, and that his faith grew and got bigger as time went on. So after Abram had lived in Canaan for 10 years, he still didn't have any children. He's 85 years old now, and he was worried that his chief servant was going to inherit all of his possessions. So God told him, "No, your son is going to inherit your possessions. Go outside and look at the stars. You can count them. You can count the number of your descendants." Then we read what most commentators on the Bible say is probably the most important verse in the whole Old Testament, Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. This is another verse that you might want to memorize. Abraham believed God, and he, in God, credited it to him as righteousness. This verse is quoted 4 times in the New Testament, and it tells us that Abram was not declared righteous by God because of anything good Abram did. Abram was declared righteous by God because he believed God's word. This is the only way that people can become righteous. And so God made a covenant with Abram. It's another covenant, and this showed Abram that God was very committed to keeping his promises. And later on, God changed Abram's name to
Abraham.
Right, and he commanded him to circumcise himself and every male in his household. Just like the rainbow was the symbol of the covenant to Noah, circumcision was the symbol of the covenant with Abraham. And Abraham again believed God. He did what God commanded. He circumcised himself and all his men that same day, showing that Abraham gave God his privacy his comfort and his ability to have children. He, in a way, symbolically yielded that to God by circumcision. Now later on, Abram's first son, Ishmael, mistreated Isaac, and God told Abram to send Ishmael away. Abram loved Ishmael, but he trusted that God knew what was best, so he did. He sent Ishmael away. And the biggest test of Abraham's faith was when God asked him to give Isaac as a burnt offering. This seemed crazy because Isaac was the promised son. This is the one that God said, you're going to have the son, and he's going to have a bunch of kids, and then the kids are going to have kids, and that's going to be the great nation. And Isaac didn't have any children yet, and now God's telling him to kill him. But Abraham chose to trust God and obey, even though he didn't understand. Hebrews says that Abraham believed God could even raise Isaac from the dead. And Abraham giving Isaac as a sacrifice was a picture of God the Father giving his son, Jesus, as a sacrifice. Now, did you notice how many different things at different times in his life God commanded Abraham to give up? What were some of the things?
He left his home and family, his country, his nation.
Okay. What else?
His first son, his first wife.
Yep. Okay.
The second wife.
Yeah.
First son and second wife.
Mm-hmm.
He gave up the land that Lot took.
Mm-hmm.
He chose what was left over.
Mm-hmm. And then even being willing to give up Isaac, although he got him back, he was willing to, God said, kill him, he was willing to do that. So now, if you think, do you think if we could talk to Abraham today, would he say, wow, obeying God is really hard because you just got to keep giving up all this stuff you got asked for? Do you think, is that what he would say, do you think?
You can see the millions have come after him. I doubt he'd say that.
That's right.
But it would break his heart that the Jews are so hard towards God.
That's true too. I think Abraham would say, I made some great trades. I did give up my homeland and my family, but then God gave me the land of Canaan and a family that's become the nation of Israel. I gave up my name, and now I'm famous all over the world. And so following God is a great bargain, in a way, you could say.
And I'm in a book that everybody reads.
That's right. And we're talking about him right now here, right? Following God requires faith because you don't get rewards immediately. So you give up things now, but then you receive rewards or benefits later. So what things does following Jesus sometimes require us to give up?
Family, friends.
You might even have to move someplace like Central Africa or something. Or a different lifestyle.
Go to a different place in the world to tell them about Jesus. Okay. Or just be willing to give up control of our lives and let God control and do things that we don't understand, even though we know God says to do them.
Or give up your life.
Yeah.
Abraham never really got that land. It was like he was just kind of like a sojourner.
Got that in here in a minute. No problem. So when Jesus asks us to give up things, is that a sacrifice?
Should be.
Only if you're about 10.
Right. So in a way, you could think of it, it's a short-term sacrifice, right? But it's a long-term gain because the things that Jesus has promised to us are far greater. Like he said, whoever gives up home or family or farms or whatever in this life will receive 100 times as much. In persecution, they'll receive 100 times as much in this age and in the age to come. So even though it takes faith to give up things to follow Jesus short-term, long-term we gain.
The only way to have eternal life is in a good place. So whatever it costs here is nothing compared to the glories of heaven.
Let's see. Now, interestingly, God did not include all of Abraham's children in the special promise to become a part of the chosen ambassador nation. Only one of his sons, Isaac, was chosen, and then not all of Isaac's. Isaac had two sons, and only one of them was included in the promise. Only his younger son, Jacob, was chosen. And from these things, we can learn a couple things. One is that if your parents are Christians when you were born, that doesn't make you a Christian. Just like being born to Abraham did not make Ishmael a part of the chosen nation. Jesus later on tells us you have to be born again. You have to be born a second time. Just being born to Christian parents does not make you a Christian. And we also learned that God chooses people before they're even born. Before Esau and Jacob were even born, before they'd done anything good or bad, God said, Jacob is the one that I'm going to establish my covenant with. So it wasn't anything in them. And actually, when we look at the lives of all the patriarchs, we can see they weren't really, none of them were really good men. Abraham lied 2 different times. He said that his wife Sarah was his sister. He allowed 2 different kings to take her as their wife, and gave up, having her as his wife and the opportunity to have a son Isaac. Fortunately for Abraham, God told the kings to give Sarah back to him. And Abraham, of course, was also a polygamist. His son Isaac also told the same kind of lie. He said that his wife Rebekah was his sister, and Isaac wasn't really a very good father. He showed love to one son more than the other, which parents should always show the same love to each child. And Jacob was a liar also. He was a cheat in business things and in family relationships. He had 4 wives, and he cared more for one of his wives and her sons than he did for the other wives and their sons. And the 12 sons of Jacob that the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel were named for, very famous names, but these 12 guys, most of them were really awful. The firstborn son, Reuben, committed incest with one of his father's wives. Simeon and Levi killed all the men in a town, took the women and the children and the animals as plunder. Judah, another son, committed incest with his daughter-in-law. And then the 10 oldest sons, they conspired together to catch Joseph, the one good son, and they were going to murder him, and finally they decided instead to sell him as a slave, make some money off of him, lied to their father and said that an animal had killed Joseph. So these guys are not really, these are the guys God picked to lead his ambassador nation. Pretty awful guys. And Joseph is the best of all the patriarchs. In many ways, he's kind of like a little picture of Jesus. Joseph's father loved him. Jesus' father loves him. Both Joseph and Jesus were predicted to rule. They were both sold for the same amount of money, 30 pieces of silver. Joseph's brothers rejected him. Jesus' brothers rejected him. Both Joseph and Jesus resisted temptation. Joseph was righteous. He was arrested and found guilty. It's like Jesus was righteous, but he was arrested and found guilty. Joseph became the only source of bread for the entire world, and Jesus is the only source of living bread for the entire world. Everyone bowed their knees before Joseph when he became ruler, and everyone will bow their knees before Jesus. During the lives of these patriarchs, God had promised them the land of Canaan, but they didn't own it yet. It didn't belong to them. They bought a few small pieces of land there. They dug a few wells. They planted a few trees. They built a few altars to God, and they buried a few of their dead family members there. But the land belonged to other nations, and that were very big and powerful. It seemed impossible that Abraham's descendants would ever own it. And by the end of the book of Genesis, Abraham's descendants don't even live in Canaan anymore. They live in Egypt. So we wonder, is God going to keep his promises? And we'll see in the next lesson that he does. But even during this time of the patriarchs, God started to keep the promise he made to the patriarchs to bless the nations. He said, I'm going to bless the nations through you. You're going to be my ambassador nation to bless the other nations. So Abram blessed the people of Sodom by rescuing them from the enemy army that had conquered them. Abram prayed for God to have mercy on Sodom. And God blessed Abram's first son, Ishmael, just because he was Abram's son. Ishmael became the father of the Arab nations. And of course, Joseph saved many nations from starvation. So summarizing it, everything we've looked at, God chose one family to display his character to all the other families, all the other nations of the world. This family instead often displayed terrible character to the world, but God still took special care of this family, and he protected them from enemies. He protected them from dying of starvation. It shows us again God's faithfulness to his word and faithfulness to his people, for which you and I can be very thankful also. Any questions or comments? Okay. All right. Thank you all. May the Lord bless you, and I look forward to being with you again next time. Bye-bye.